Do you want me to start at exactly at 7 o'clock or 7:01?
Yeah, I think you should start. I think you should start as close to 7 as possible. You may wait just a couple minutes after 7 to give people time to come in. Okay.
They're coming in now. Okay, 15. Well, we'll get started. I would like to say good evening and welcome to this evening's program, COVID-19 Vaccine Things You Need to Know, under the leadership of the Health and Wellness Ministry. We recognize and witness the past harm, hurt, and distrust that is part of the African American experience in research. However, we want to address the fear and uncertainty of the virus and the vaccine so that we can make an informed decision. The scourge of COVID is real. As of today at 2:08 p.m., there are 741,583 confirmed cases in North Carolina, 9,099 deaths. In the United States today, there were 26,027,106 confirmed cases and 437,743 deaths. Globally, the statistics are still dismal. There are 101,636,470 people infected and 2,194,790 deaths. Our agenda follows with an invocation by our pastor, introduction of the speaker, the presentation, and questions and answers. We have a few questions previously submitted. If you have some, put them in the chat, and Geneva will moderate the chat. Pastor Brown?
We thank each and every one of you for being with us on tonight. I would if you would bow your heads for a word of prayer. Lord, we thank you and we praise you for this day. We thank you for this time in which we've gathered to be enlightened and to garner deeper understanding about medical science and this vaccine that is meant to fight the coronavirus. We thank you, Lord, for all of the invention that has come forth, all of the ingenuity, all the ways in which your knowledge has been placed within physicians and scientists to bring about a cure for this disease. But we pray, oh Lord, that you allow us, open up our hearts and our minds to receive what it is that you have for us tonight. We thank you for everyone who's taking time out of their schedules, and we pray your blessings upon this time this evening. Thank you and praise you for all things. In the name of your son, Jesus, we do say, amen.
Amen. Our speaker, Richard Watkins, was born in Tyler, Texas, and lives in Durham, North Carolina. He graduated from Grimsley Senior High School in Greensboro in 2003. His academic and athletic ability earned him a full ride scholarship to Fayetteville State University, where he was a Chancellor Scholar and football player. Now he is a recognized virologist and scientist who earned a doctorate in microbiology and immunology from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in 2014. He is also the CEO and founder of the Science Policy Action Network, a nonprofit organization dedicated to bridging the gap between the scientific community and the general public. He is also the program coordinator for the Chancellor Science Scholars Program at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. There he works to open up science for people of color and connect students to mentors. Many of you might remember him as a candidate for the North Carolina's 4th Congressional District in 2018. He ran for that election to the House of Representatives, but he lost in the Democratic primary on May 8, 2018, but I'm sure he's going to run again. He is also the classmate of Dr. Kizzy Corbett, who led the vaccine development at NIH. As Nina Simone says, to be young, gifted, and black. I now present Dr. Richard Watkins.
Thank you so much for that very kind introduction. It's truly an honor and a blessing to be with you all today. Go ahead and get my PowerPoint up here for you. So I would say one of the greatest honors of my life, uh, coming secondary to being a father and being a husband, is the ability to have founded and run as Chief Executive Officer the Science Policy Action Network. And let me be clear, because um, when you talk about connecting science to the community or science to stakeholders, this is what we actually care about. And it's threefold, and it's threefold only. We care about improving life, we care about extending life, and we care about saving lives. There is nothing more important to us than those three things. And when I was asked to give this presentation, I wanted to start providing context to the situation that we find ourselves in. And the first place I went was the Department of Veteran Affairs. And I'm trying to advance my slide here, but it's not allowing me to do so. All right, there we go. The Department of Veteran Affairs. I wanted to go directly to the source because very few things are as antithetical or as opposed to saving lives than the sacrifice that our women and men in uniform um, take on to protect our freedoms and our American interests. And so I wanted to look there first. And there's a lot of information up here. All of this information is publicly available from the Department of Veteran Affairs, because they do a really good job. But they look at all of the American wars from 1775, which is the American Revolution, to 1991, which is Desert Shield, Desert Storm. It stops there, and conflicts around the world continue. What's not included is the global war on terror, which is 2001 to present. But in American wars in total, and let me give you a better view of it here, the deaths in battle, the sacrifices these women and men make in battle, total 651,031 lives lost. And I want to contextualize those lives because those aren't just individual lives that are lost. Those are families now without daughters and sisters and mothers and aunts. Those are families that are now without brothers, sons, and fathers. These are entire families that suffer this loss. And so when you see the number 651,031, though that number is enormous, it really pales into comparison the total or the totality of impact that that has on our society. And so it's not just the soldiers that have sacrificed and committed the last full measure of patriotism, it's the entire families. 651,000. I want to introduce another number to you. 400,000. Let me correct that. Over 400,000. Over 400,000 lives lost. in just under a year. I want to say that with as maximum impact as I can, because I want to impress upon you the unique situation that we find ourselves in. In all of the wars that America has ever fought, from 1776 all the way to the 2000s, over 600,000 lives have been lost. In just under a year, we've lost over 400,000 lives to this. To this. Not an enemy combatant, not a terrorist, but a virus. Specifically, SARS-CoV-2. That's the name of the virus. And that's very important because it will allow you to understand what is said often when discussing vaccines. And we'll get into that a little bit later. SARS-CoV-2 is a member of the coronavirus family. I know a lot of people have heard of coronavirus before. SARS-CoV-2 is a member of that family. The family of coronaviruses pose a very serious threat to human lives everywhere. Now, these viruses are found in bats primarily. And when people come in contact with bats for one reason or another, there presents an opportunity for this virus to jump from a bat into people. Now, this has happened many times in a very short period of time. In fact, there have been almost 10 instances of coronaviruses jumping from bats into people. Most of these instances result into mild cold-like symptoms. In fact, they cause the cold. In fact, roughly 7 or 6 of them cause the cold. 3 of them, however, have caused very severe disease. Severe disease resulting in public, global concern. The first, SARS. After that, MERS. And now, SARS-CoV-2. The virus that causes COVID-19, or coronavirus 2019, which is the year it was discovered. It's very important to understand the distinctions between the two. Much like HIV causes AIDS and influenza causes the flu, SARS-CoV-2 causes COVID-19, which is the disease. And it's very important that everyone takes this seriously. I know many people are. I don't think you would be on this call tonight if you did not take it seriously. But I would like to take a moment to describe in a bit of detail what you may experience if you are infected with SARS-CoV-2 and you develop what is known as COVID-19. And I'll give you a bit of a timeline so that you can really appreciate the course of this situation. And I'll stop at different points. We'll start at December 2020. I like to pick December because it's a time in which we get together as families. It's a time in which many people said, enough of staying at home. I have to be with my families. This is Christmas. So let's start there. Now, somewhere in December 2020, you may have come into contact with an individual who is infected with SARS-CoV-2. They don't know it because they don't display symptoms. You contract the virus from that individual and you had no idea. And you leave the family gathering, and unbeknownst to you, you are infected with SARS-CoV-2. Now, you can remain oblivious to your infection for almost 7 days, an entire week. Now, at which point, if you are to develop symptoms, you will start to develop symptoms around 7 days post-infection. So after you've left that family gathering, it can be an entire week before you start developing any kind of symptoms whatsoever. Now, 3 days later, symptoms can progress. And when those symptoms progress, you may find yourself in a hospital. Now, we'll start our percentage there. Once you're there, we're going to start at 100%. Following admission into the hospital, 5 days later, 21% of individuals who enter the hospital because of SARS-CoV-2 resulting in COVID-19, 21% of those individuals will continue to progress. And 2 days later, they'll find themselves in the ICU, the intensive care unit. Now, of those individuals, 6.9% of those individuals will continue to progress and continue to progress. Now, keep in mind, we started in December. February 10th, you're still progressing in the ICU, and it may not be until February 28th where about 0.9% of the people admitted into the hospital will succumb to COVID-19 and perish from the earth. I hope I said that clear enough. An infection in December may not take its toll and ultimately your life until February 28th. And during that time, you can experience different stages of infection. Stage 1 is the early infection, your viral response phase during which symptoms of upper respiratory tract infection dominate. You will progress to stage 2, which is the pulmonary phase, when the patients develop full-blown pneumonia with all of its associated symptoms. In stage 3, the final stage, hyperinflammation. That's when patients develop acute respiratory distress syndrome, or ARDS, sepsis, kidney failure, and other organ failure. Your body begins to tear itself apart. And the reason why this is all so problematic is because you never know if someone is infected. You never know if you're infected until you just start developing symptoms. And as those symptoms progress, the best thing that you could possibly do is pray, because there is no known cure. Treatments are on the horizon, but there are no known cures. And whether or not you pull out of it, although percentages favor you pulling out of it, you don't know what side of the odds you will fall on. That's why I urge you to take this very, very seriously. And although this is very grim, I want to communicate to you this. There is hope. There is hope against the most deadly thing that we've seen since the H1N1 pandemic of 1918, otherwise known as the Spanish flu. Spanish flu killed millions, killed more Americans during World War I than combat itself. Now, we were able to pull out of that At those days, we didn't even know what a virus was. However, since those days, science has developed exponentially. We know so much more about viruses. And although science has improved dramatically, I am saddened to tell you that it doesn't seem that national leadership has improved in parallel with the science. So that is why it's incumbent on us to make the appropriate decisions and take our safety into our own hands. However, we are in good hands through science. And I just want to point out some key players and to provide some additional context. The first individual up here is Francis Jenner. Edward Jenner, I'm sorry, Edward Jenner. Edward Jenner discovered that milkmaids who were exposed to blisters and boils on the udders of cows that they tended to, they didn't succumb to smallpox. Smallpox are widely regarded as one of the worst infectious diseases that humans have ever dealt with, killing millions upon millions. He then thought or hypothesized that if he was able to expose individuals to the pus or the blister contents from those cows and expose those to healthy individuals, that they then would become protected from smallpox. He was absolutely right, saving millions, if not billions of lives, to the point where we don't hear about smallpox anymore. That was the first ever vaccine. The next individual is Jonas Salk. Jonas Salk developed a vaccine for polio. Polio ravaged the United States. And now it can only be found in 2 countries. Jenner probably had people who doubted what he did, but we don't know about those individuals. History books do not tell their tales. We only celebrate Jenner. Salk probably had people who were reluctant to jump on board with what he was presenting. However, history books do not tell their stories. History books only describe the accomplishments of Dr. Salk. Right after that, and no less of importance, is Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett, the lead scientist at the National Institutes of Health and the National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Disease, who led the way to discover, as to date, the most effective vaccine to prevent the onset of COVID-19. And we have naysayers to her work, but I would just remind you that history is important, because if we do not learn the lessons of history, we will repeat them. Jenner, Salk, and Corbett all have their naysayers, all have people who balk at the things that they are presenting to them. But I promise you that soon history will forget those individuals and only remember these individuals for the massive accomplishments that they've made. And Dr. Corbett is North Carolina's very own, and I'm absolutely honored to have gone to graduate school with her and consider her a dear friend. She was at my wedding, and last week I attended her Zoom birthday celebration where she turned 35 years old. I just wanted to pause right there because that's significant. Black woman, 35 years old. The world has never seen anything like that before, and from North Carolina. but that makes sense. You can't spell science without NC. Now, let me go into a little bit of the detail regarding her work. Her work is an mRNA vaccine. In general, scientists or a person administering the vaccine into an individual, whether it's the Pfizer vaccine or the Moderna vaccine, both are RNA-based or mRNA-based vaccines. You are injected in the arm. Your cells then take up the mRNA and then present the antigens, which are the surface proteins of the virus called spike proteins. Your body sees that and is able to mount a defense against the virus that it has yet to see. Therefore, when you are exposed to the virus, you're already well prepared. Your defenses are already fortified. And the virus, even if it gets to you, will not be able to cause disease in over 94 or 95% of cases because your body is already prepared for it. See, without a vaccine, your immune system is always playing a game of catch up. And in many cases, it is not able to catch up. But with the vaccine, there's no game of catch up. Your body is ready. So when the virus enters your body is able to find it and snuff it out very, very quickly before you even get sick. Now, very briefly, I want to say that the virus has affected us all in different ways. It's okay to be scared of the virus, but don't be scared of the vaccine. These mRNA vaccines contain only three things: salt water, fat, and mRNA. That's it. mRNA is one of the most fundamental building blocks of biology. There are a few things that can be considered more natural than mRNA, and then fat, and then salt water. That's it. And whereas the vaccine, which has been rigorously tested, has resulted in, I don't know, few, if any, deaths, the virus has resulted in over 400,000 deaths, the majority of whom are Black. And so you have a decision to make. Would you want to roll the dice on the vaccine, which will protect you, has been more rigorously tested than pretty much anything that you put into your body right now, or the virus that you already know has infected and killed over 400,000 Americans? Now, these vaccines are available but are in short supply. This is the former, and I really want to show this because this is no longer what we use. This is the former phase rollout of vaccine distribution. 1A, 1B, phase 2, phase 3, and phase 4. It's no longer like that. Now here are the phases. Phase 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. This has changed since my last presentation, which was just about 2 weeks ago, which further adds to the complication of the vaccine rollout, is that it changes so quickly. So phase 1 or stage 1, healthcare workers, long-term care staff and residents. Phase 2, older adults. That's anybody 65 years of age and older. That's the current phase that we're under. After that, we're not here yet, but after that, we've got frontline essential workers, adults at high risk for exposure and increased risk of severe illness, and in stage 5, everyone else. And this is my last slide, and I'll leave you with this. Knowing that African Americans bear the brunt of the deaths related to COVID-19, you would assume, since the strategy of vaccination is to vaccinate the most vulnerable populations, that the vaccines will be administered in an equitable way. one would be safe to assume that since we are to vaccinate in a way that addresses those communities and those individuals most at risk, most vulnerable to death, that the percentages of those individuals will be really high as far as vaccination. However, I am saddened to tell you that that is not the case. Here is from the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. People vaccinated by demographics. You may want to check on this because this may have been updated. This is as recent as this past Sunday, and I doubt that anything has been done to ameliorate these disparities. Dark blue is second dose and light blue is the first dose. American Indian or Alaskan Natives, both second and first dose, only represent 1% of the total population in North Carolina that has been vaccinated. Asian or Pacific Islander, 3% received their first dose out of everybody who's received the first dose, and 6% out of everybody who's received the second dose. Black or African American, which represent almost 22% of North Carolina's population and represent a disproportionate percentage of deaths in North Carolina, have only received 11% of the first dose and 9% of the second dose. In comparison, white people have received 82% of the first dose and 80% of the second dose. And at the bottom, you have other and undisclosed. And I will just leave you with this very sad and very embarrassing piece of information out of the state of North Carolina. We have a responsibility to educate. We have a responsibility to alleviate fears. But we also have a responsibility to alleviate systemic discrimination in our healthcare system. And we are seeing some stark examples of discrimination as far as vaccines. And one could say, well, you know, Black people are hesitant, or as they say, vaccine hesitant or reluctant to vaccination hesitancy. I would push back on that. A lot of people say, well, it's because that's healthcare workers, and that represents a disproportionate percentage of healthcare workers. I would also push back on that. Healthcare workers and people working with individuals with COVID include not only physicians, it includes nurses, nurses assistants, physicians assistants, custodial staff, and dining services. There are a lot of African Americans in the healthcare fields. And then you could say, oh, well, that's young people in the healthcare fields, and those individuals are reluctant to get vaccinated. That may be true, but anecdotally, I can tell you from giving these meetings and giving these presentations to church after church, church after church, in the demographics 65 years of age and older, there is much less hesitancy, much less reluctancy than in younger populations, many of whom are not even being offered the vaccine yet because it's not yet their phase, it's not yet their turn. We have people who are trying to get vaccinated and can't get an appointment. I have talked to church after church, and they say they've been calling, trying to get an appointment. And then they are told, we'll give you a call back in 72 hours. 3 weeks later, they still haven't gotten a call back. There are pieces of information that are missing from the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. Just last Sunday, I was able to get somebody vaccinated at South Point Pharmacy. South Point Pharmacy is not on the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services list of places you can go to get vaccinated. You've got to be on the in the know crowd. You got to be in the know to know these things. You also have to have access to time to keep hitting that refresh button on your computer so that you are able to get an appointment. Or if you don't have internet access, you call and then the health departments aren't appropriately staffed. And so there's nobody there to answer your phone call, and you leave a message. You hope, you got your fingers crossed that you hear back, and you won't. There are massive disparities that are present in our healthcare system at every level, and they have yet to be addressed. And so now it's my responsibility to make you aware of these disparities so that you can empower each other, your leaders, or even me to address these situations, because we are the most vulnerable population. But as shown here, we are not getting the services or the treatments that we are supposed to. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions that you may have. Thank you all so very much for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions. Again, thank you so much. I'm honored and blessed to be with you all tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Watkins. You gave us some information that enlightened us and it also empowered us. So, did you get those 3 questions that I sent?
I remember by heart the first question, and I can pull them up on my phone.
Okay.
So the one question I remember is, as vaccine shipments come in, what will be the approach to provide individuals with their second dose or to provide individuals with their first dose? Now, that has not yet been determined, right? We're trying to weigh out two things: exhausting all of the vaccines available, or making sure that we have enough to give people their second dose. Right now, we've got people getting their second dose and we're running out of vaccines. And so I ultimately don't know what decision will be made as we start getting in those additional doses. I can tell you that people are coming in for their secondary doses. And as you can tell by the percentages, those percentages are pretty close. So it seems like the people who are getting their first dose are able to get in their second dose. And in some demographics, say for instance, the Asian population in North Carolina, out of that demographic, there's a higher percentage of those who have already received their second dose than there are individuals who have already received their first dose. But in my opinion, it is critical for people to get their second dose, because I don't necessarily believe in half measures or doing things half-hearted. If you're going to do something, you have to do it correctly. And so you have 2 vaccines, both Pfizer and Moderna, that require 2 doses. So you have to put into place in your system of administration the ability for people to get both doses. So that is just my opinion, that people need to get their second dose. And when you do go in to get your first dose, you need to be guaranteed your second dose, because you don't want to go in and get half the job, right? You want to go in and know that people are taking care of you to the fullest capabilities. You don't want to go in there and think that you're only going to get half measures. You want to be able to get the full protection. And I just want to remind you that the first dose, once your immune system ramps up, only gives you about 50% protection from the development of severe disease and the development of COVID. But upon that second dose, that's when you get to that 95, 96 protection. And that is the protection that you really want. You don't want 50%. Like I said, you don't want half measures. You're going to want people, if they get the Moderna and Pfizer, you're going to have people get both doses. And so if I was in charge, I would put in place a system that's equitable and a system that guarantees somebody who gets a first dose that they also get a second dose. And let me bring up your questions so I can read them aloud, and
Dr.
then
Watkins.
uh,
Dr. Watkins,
yes.
I have them. I'll ask for you.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any medical conditions that would keep you from getting the vaccine?
So right now, the recommendation is that everybody gets vaccinated. However, I really would encourage you, if you have immunodeficiencies, if you're receiving cancer treatment, to confer with your physician. And when you get vaccinated, I would urge you to get vaccinated in a place that is aware and capable of dealing with an individual who's immunosuppressed and getting vaccinated. Second, are some cases of allergies that could result in a reaction to the vaccine in which you would need an EpiPen, anaphylactic shock, or something like that, right? So you need to also get vaccinated in a place that is capable of dealing with that. But these symptoms, they will occur very rapidly. They're not situations that would pop up long, like later down the road. And so, so long as that medical facility that is vaccinating you is aware and capable of dealing with any kind of reactions related to allergies that may kind of result from a vaccination, then you will be absolutely fine. And I would also remind you that even with that, that only occurs in a small subset of the population, even that subset that does have allergies. So it's a very, very small likelihood that that will happen. But in both of those cases, you need to make sure that your healthcare provider is aware, and that also the location in which you're getting vaccinated is aware, and that they have the capacity to work with individuals who have those kind of conditions who are being vaccinated. There are places in place who are very capable of dealing with that and providing you vaccines in a very, very safe manner. Those two situations are the situations that I would mention that you watch out for.
If you have had COVID-19, do you need to take the vaccine?
Yes, you do need to take the vaccine, because the antibody response that results after an infection, it's subpar to the antibody response that you'll get. Sorry, the antibody response that you get after you survive a SARS-CoV-2 infection is subpar to the antibody response or the immune response that you would get if you were vaccinated. So you're going to allow a few weeks to pass and consult with your healthcare provider or the people administering the vaccine. But after that time elapses, it's around 30 days, you will need to go ahead and get vaccinated.
All right. What is your opinion about wearing two masks?
Wearing two masks in some situations is absolutely fine, but wearing the proper mask um, properly is good as well. So I don't have problems with people wearing two masks as long as that they're wearing them correctly and that they're comfortable. The biggest problem that I have with people wearing masks that I see is the mask falling below the nose, and individuals not even adjusting the mask to go back above the nose. Keep in mind the nasal root or the nose is just as effective as the mouth as far as you getting infected, right? So you're going to want to make sure your nose is covered. The mask is not effective if your nose is not covered. Now I have a preference of mask, and I think everybody has their own preferences. But I would urge you to kind of look into this mask. The masks that have the around the ear loops oftentimes are pretty, in my opinion, pretty uncomfortable to wear. If you wear them for a long period of time, they start to dig in behind your ears and become pretty uncomfortable. And also the around the ear mask also have a tendency to fall below the nose. My preference of mask is the mask that has the straps that go around your head. The N95 mask, those disposable masks, are masks that sit on top of your face and have straps that go around the back of your head. But you can also purchase fabric masks, cloth masks, masks that you can reuse and wash that also have a strap that goes around your head. What you'll find are those masks are a lot more comfortable. They don't dig into your ears and they're held in place over your mouth and nose much better than a mask that goes around your ears. I actually have no idea why the majority of masks that are in circulation go around your ears. There are pretty much no other masks that do that. Like there's not even Halloween masks that go around your ears. When my daughter goes and dresses up like Spider-Man for Halloween, back when we had trick or treating uh, prior to the pandemic, every mask, every costume mask that you have goes around your head because that is a more secure way of holding a mask. And now all of a sudden, when the stakes are really high and we have to have a mask in place, we have masks that go around our ears that are really uncomfortable and they fall down. That is why my preference is the masks that have straps that go around your head. Um, Hopefully, everybody knows what I'm talking. Did that make sense? What I was just describing?
Yes.
Okay. So around wearing two masks, that's fine. So long as it's comfortable, you can keep it in place and wear it. Obviously, that adds extra barriers so that particles can't get in and out. But I think wearing a mask properly is very, very important. And I just want to reiterate that a mask falling below your nose is not good. And you see people wearing a mask that falls below their nose. If you love them, you should tell them to adjust their mask.
Will primary care physicians eventually have the vaccine? Since many people have primary physicians, would that be an option for ensuring that everyone is vaccinated?
Right now, that is not necessarily included in the current rollout of vaccines, but that should be the case as vaccines continue to roll out. Right now, vaccines are located in kind of like vaccination hubs, and then it is projected that they'll be located at pharmacies. Like CVS Pharmacy is supposed to be a pharmacy that has it, but right now, they're not available in the state of North Carolina. But as more vaccines become available, they will be more widely available. But right now, they want to have those hubs so they can keep track of the vaccines that exist because these vaccines are so precious and there's such a low quantity of vaccines that healthcare providers want to keep track of this. But pretty soon, when the numbers become apparent, yes, you should be able to get your vaccine at a primary care provider, at CVS, at Walgreens, at different places. And I want to say that right now we have the Moderna vaccine and we have the Pfizer vaccine, but on the horizon we have the Novavax vaccine, and on the horizon we also have the Johnson and Johnson vaccine. And later down the pipe, we should have the AstraZeneca vaccine. And I would point out that the Johnson and Johnson vaccine is stable. It's much more stable. It doesn't need to be cold constantly. A regular refrigerator will be fine. And Johnson and Johnson is able to produce those quantities in the billions. So, and that's one dose as well. So you don't even need a second dose. Those vaccines are coming down the pipe. And I just wanted to say that because that has something to do with the availability of vaccines with your primary care provider. We're not there yet, but hopefully very, very soon we'll have the quantities available where you can get vaccinated at various locations.
In follow up to that, do you think the cold storage will be a problem in most primary care physician offices? Is that going to be a hindrance to them having it?
Yes, absolutely. Most places don't have a freezer that can keep a temperature below 80 degrees Celsius. I mean, that's something that a lot of places just don't have. And so that requirement, that specifically the Pfizer vaccine, that's a limitation that most places are going to face. And so there's only few places that have the capacity to store vaccine doses at negative 80 degrees Celsius.
And our final question in our chat: what can we do to advocate for our communities to be treated fairly and to have the level of access we need to the vaccine?
Yeah, you have to hold individuals accountable. And right now, what I'm trying to do is I'm working with people who administer vaccines. I actually have a meeting next week with the UNC vaccine distributors. And I hope to have a follow up meeting with Orange County Health Department to see what situations are available to kind of ameliorate these disparities. Because how we have it right now, this kind of first come, first serve, there's a lot of problems there. And we're going to continue to see these disparities if we don't make deliberate efforts to change that. This first come, first serve model, how people have it, it just doesn't work. And then you have situations where you basically have pop up vaccinations around the state. I just described to you a situation where South Point Pharmacy, which gave us an opportunity to have 3 individuals vaccinated who wouldn't have been vaccinated otherwise. And that's something that people just didn't know about, right? And so a lot of these kind of pop-up vaccination scenarios, like I said, you have to be in the know. And most people aren't in the know. I mean, most people aren't directly connected to somebody who can call their friend up and say, "Hey, you got some vaccines for me?" And then I just relay that to somebody else. And that's what I was able to do. And most people don't have that opportunity. And that was just 3 people. And what I need to do is I need to go from 3 to 300 to 1,000 and continue to do that if we are to kind of address these disparities. But some of the suggestions that I am focused on is making sure that we have spots reserved each day for appointments from individuals from marginalized communities. Without direct, intentional, deliberate efforts like that, there may not be any chance to kind of ameliorate these disparities at this point. And I just want to remind you that, again, the very people who are having the hardest time getting vaccinated are the very people who are most susceptible to death. And that kind of situation, I cannot tolerate that. And so you have to make sure you make it known, right? Because a lot of people will put the onus or the blame on those communities. For instance, when I that slide that I just showed you, right, that had the disparities. I remember I put it on social media to make people aware of the disparities that were going on. And what people did automatically were do everything that they could to justify the disparities that they were seeing. Oh, that happened. Oh, because Black people don't like to take vaccines. That's not true. I mean, talking about people from 65 years of age and older, there is not as much reluctancy in that age group, right? Or that's from the health. That's because there are so many more white people in healthcare. Well, that's also not true because there are a lot of Black people in healthcare, and so I don't know if this is some strange Stockholm syndrome. And Stockholm syndrome is basically when what you see when people are like kidnapped or held captive, this strange psychology happens where they justify their captivity and they begin to adore and admire their captors. I feel like this strange situation happens with marginalized or oppressed communities where they see the discrimination happening, or they see the disparities that are happening, but then they'll rationalize preferable treatment of other groups, groups of more privilege, and they'll also justify their own mistreatment. But I would say that there is no justification for the disparities that we're seeing with the vaccines. It is absolutely unacceptable and it cannot stand. So make sure everybody knows, from your cousins, your friends, your neighbors. I mean, when they're saying things like, Black people don't want to get vaccinated, that's not true. And that's not explaining the disparities that we're seeing. And then when they try to justify maybe reluctancy with the Tuskegee experiment, because that's what I hear a lot, I think it's very important that people understand that the Tuskegee experiment is very different from what we're seeing right now. The Tuskegee experiment was an experiment in which individuals who had syphilis were withheld penicillin, a treatment known to be effective against syphilis. It's very different than a vaccine that was created by a Black scientist. So in the situation with the Tuskegee experiment, we didn't have even a seat at the table. But here with this situation, not only did we have a seat at the table, but we were able to pick the menu, and the seating. So we had a hand in every aspect of this. And so that's very, very, very different than what happened there. And again, that doesn't explain the disparities that we're saying, because we have Black people, people from our community who are desperately trying to get vaccinated and they just can't. And so I think that's really important to make sure that everybody knows is that, listen, we want to get vaccinated and we just can't. There aren't appointments. There aren't enough vaccines available. That's not our fault. And stop blaming us for broader societal problems. And so I think that's really, really important. And hopefully that answers your question. It was a bit long-winded, and hopefully I touched on your question a little bit.
All right, we've gotten a couple of more questions.
Please.
When vaccinated, does that exempt you from wearing a mask?
No, it doesn't. You should still wear a mask. So the first thing I would tell you is that the first dose will only get you 50%, and the second dose gets you 95%. But that 95% is the development of severe disease or severe symptoms. It doesn't necessarily mean that you are not infected by the virus. It just means that an infection with the virus, SARS-CoV-2, doesn't result in the development of COVID-19. And because you have the virus, you can then transmit that virus to somebody who's not vaccinated. And then that person who is not vaccinated can develop COVID-19, severe disease, and then subsequently die. So when vaccinated, still wear your mask, still practice the 3 Ws. Wear a mask, wait at a safe distance, and wash your hands. You're still going to want to do that. Although you're protected from developing severe disease, it doesn't mean that you can't be infected and infect somebody else, right? So your infection, it won't cause any problems with you, but your infection can then allow you to infect somebody else. And if that person is not vaccinated, then that person can ultimately develop disease and die. So hopefully that made sense. Did I answer your question?
Hopefully so. She's on mute.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Yes, she said yes.
All
Yes.
right. Excellent.
Okay.
I'm the one that asked that question. Excuse me. You answered it. So it looks like wearing the mask is going to be our new norm for a while.
Yes, I would say for a while. Now this is just my guess. I would imagine that this situation that we're in is going to be our norm until, I would say, next February. Now I could be off a little bit, because one of the things that make everything they were doing is very complicated is so many people flaunting safety guidelines.
Mm-hmm.
And what ends up happening when you flaunt safety guidelines is it results in so much virus in the population.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have so much virus floating around in the population that's uncontrolled, you have what happens, the appearance of these mutant strains.
Right.
And the virus is always trying to find an edge here or to find an edge there. And it will always try to work to find mutations that will allow it to avoid vaccines or avoid immune responses, right? So the very existence of people who don't take this virus seriously is the thing that's going to keep us in this pandemic longer.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
And so it's really hard to really kind of imagine that from an individual level, that your decisions are basically impacting the entire planet
That's
and the
right.
entire United States, because we are very selfish, individualistic people, and we don't necessarily see how we are connected and how we need to make sacrifices for other people to be okay.
Right.
That's a very hard thing for us to do, right? You have to die unto oneself, right? This is that kind of sacrifice that you have to make so that we pull ourselves out of this. But I would say the flip side of that, for all of those people who are doing the right thing, you are the reason that more people aren't dead. When we pull out of this, you're going to be the reason that we pull out of this. Your sacrifice isn't for nothing. Your sacrifice means that we have a chance. This Zoom call right here means that we have a chance. There is hope. So long as I have the opportunity to talk on platforms like this to people like you, there is still hope. And so I just always want to communicate to people that there's two sides to that coin. People who don't take this seriously are the reason why we're in the situation that we are in now. Other side of that coin, people who do take it seriously are the reason, the sole reason that this situation isn't even worse, right? So I just want to make sure that you all know the huge impact that you all have made on the world for the better. And it's hard to know that you're doing that on an individual level. But the things that you do as an individual, as a responsible person, willing to sacrifice their own personal desires, saves lives every single day and is going to be the reason why we get out of this. And so I just want to impress upon you the huge historical role that you are all playing in making sure that we pull ourselves out of one of the worst pandemics that America has ever seen.
We're at our hour, but we have one final quick question. What can we do to help eliminate the fear?
Yes. So as I think the fear thing is I would say just based on my experience in regards to the vaccine. So fear regarding the virus is warranted and justified, right? I remember I talked to my stepmom just yesterday, and she said to me, she said, you know, I think I'm getting on everybody's nerves. I'm paranoid. I'm too overly safe. And I asked her, I was like, well, are you still alive? And she's like, yeah. I was like, well, you're not overly safe. You're doing it right. I mean, this virus has killed 400,000 people in under a year. You're doing it right. It kills like 4,000 people every day. There's no overly safe to this. Now, I will say the fear in regards to the vaccine is not necessarily warranted. It's real, but it's not necessarily warranted. And I will also say the fear and the hesitancy of getting vaccinated right now is not our biggest concern. It is not at all our biggest concern. Our biggest concern is the availability of vaccines. Our biggest concern are the deep seated racial inequities that are baked in to our healthcare system, right? Because, like I said, we have people who are wanting to get vaccinated, but they can't. So I know a lot of times you hear on the news that it has a lot to do with vaccine hesitancy and that Black people are scared to get vaccinated. That is not our biggest problem. And I think it's once again people blaming us for what's happening. It is not us. We want to get vaccinated. Yes, there are a lot of people who are scared. There are, but that is not our problem regarding vaccination. Our problem is an ineffective rollout of the vaccine and an ineffective administration of the vaccination plan that seems to particularly and disproportionately leave out the Black community. That's our biggest concern. Not fear within the Black community, but the institutions responsible for protecting us. That is our biggest concern. And I see fear just melting away all over the place. when you see your grandma get vaccinated, when you see your friend get vaccinated. You know, I think the fear, like I said, the fear of the vaccine isn't our biggest concern. The fear is the inadequacies that are present in the vaccine rollout and implementation.
That concludes our questions.
Well, thank you very much. And hopefully I answered them all appropriately. And as you have more questions, I'll be happy to answer them. You have my email address. Please send them my way. If a question comes to you later, I'll be happy to address them.